not to mess with anything before I get on. Okay. Good morning. Happy Friday. How are you? How's your week gone? Adam's in here. Kelly's in here. Yay! Happy Friday. I'm really bright. Should we turn the light down a little bit? Go lay down. My dog wants to say hello. Or he wants me to take him out. One or the other. You woke up early? So did I. No, because I'm already vaccinated. And also Ohio. I don't know. Ohio's okay. But isn't it sad that we have to bribe people to get vaccines? Malik is in here. Happy birthday, belated. Everyone tell Malik happy birthday. Knowledge. Here, let me write it. Happy birthday to you. Lalo, good morning. Andrew, good morning. Yes, it is. It's very cray. What are you guys doing this weekend? Speaking of being vaccinated, oh my gosh, you guys, this past week, I have had more invitations and more like, I don't know what. So I plans. Don't you love it? It's great. I haven't worn on scope in a minute, but I do love to wear it out. Oh, you want to see these flowers? They're still looking beautiful. I'm not on Tinder, but if I was, you would better believe I would have a ton of invites right now. I just know it. You think it's actually a new shirt that's printed, a new shirt. Is anyone here on Tinder? Are you guys on Tinder? Should I get on Tinder? Just for shits and giggles? No. I have a plan to go to a birthday party, like a to do in June, and tomorrow oh nice, Malik. Tinder's a joke. Okay. And then tomorrow I'm having at least one person over. I don't know if her husband's coming or not. I assume he is because couples. Over for cocktails. Did you? Priscilla's in here. Oh, thank you. You like my hair? I just got it cut not too long ago. Cut and colored. And I like it okay. Although I think I wanted a different, like more severe layers than I actually got. It must be birthday season for sure. Aren't you glad though that you have nice weather for your birthday? It's rare that I have like a nice sunny day for my birthday like I did this year. Rare. I was so happy and grateful about it. So you guys have plans? Plans for the weekend? So yeah, I'm going to have, what cocktails should I make? I haven't even drank a cocktail in like almost a year. Like not almost a year, but like 10 months anyway, probably. Is it? When is your birthday? When's your birthday? What should I make? I don't even know. I mean, I guess I should, maybe ask and see what they want, but they're coming to my house. I make the rules here, right? But really, they're coming. I know, Lalo, are you still here? We need your help and advice. Um, but I have a fire ring, a little like metal fire ring that I haven't used yet. So I want to. Oh, that's so great. Um, I want. Oh, my goodness, I forgot to start record myself. I'm the worst podcaster in the history of podcasting, and I haven't even started podcasting yet. So it's not, oops, not boding well for my efforts. Like a hula hoop that's on fire. What? No. Like actually, when I got it at Rural King, the farm store, and it just said farm ring on it. So we'll try it. Try the farm ring. So I guess I need to go get like sand or whatever to put in the bottom and collect some wood. So that's the plan. But everybody's vaccinated that's coming, and I'm vaccinated. So actually, who knows what'll show up? It's one of the, when you live here and you're like, oh, you want to come over and sit around the fire? Really, who knows who's going to show up? I know one person for sure, but who will they bring? It's so exciting. Maybe nobody, but that's okay. We can have our own fun. Well, folks. Oh, you want to talk about this? About removing the masks? First of all, it wasn't ancient history that I remember the CDC saying something like, oh, don't worry about it. You don't have to wear masks. Or saying some shit like, how did they phrase it? They said like, oh, there's no evidence to show that wearing a mask prevents COVID. And then all of a sudden, like overnight, they were like, yes, Kelly, just drive up. Just drive up. If you leave right now, you have time to get here. And then they were like, oh my God, yes, everyone wear a mask. And now they're like, you don't have to wear a mask. Sorry. I'm wearing one. There's no going back from this. Not for a while anyway. I need to come down off of this for a minute. I'm definitely wearing a mask. And I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but you should too. How often have you guys gotten sick this past year with just some random cold bug or flu or yeah, exactly, Malik, exactly. First they were like, "Oh, you don't have to wear a mask, like that's overkill," or "We don't know if masks work," or whatever they were saying at the beginning. Exactly. Exactly. So anyway, if you want to breathe each other's spit, you go right ahead. Have fun. But I'm not in like that kind of relationship with with the public anymore. Once you know, it's gonna be really hard. What's my favorite cocktail? Yeah. See, I think masks. Also, did anyone feel more like, yes, Kelly, they got their first jab yesterday, which we're also so very excited about. And so far they feel fine. They haven't had nothing like I had. Um, but also the mask. Don't you just feel a little bit more, there's something psychological about putting the mask on. Like I feel like I don't know, it's like wearing some kind of social protection too. Like I don't have to smile. There's no random men saying you should smile more or something like that. Um, there's something about it. It feels safer. Exactly. Like you don't have the forced small talk that we used to have. It's totally different. Not totally. And there's still small talk, but it's different now and I'm okay with it. I like it. It's fine. And so masks, yes. Also, an opportunity to coordinate um, your mask with your outfit, which I have yet to do. I don't think I've ever had a mask that like perfectly matches my outfit. So I'm really jealous if you guys do. And if you do, send me a picture. I want to see it. You should be proud. My favorite cocktail. I don't know what my favorite cocktail is. Um, but I'm thinking of getting some Saint Germain and creating something with that because it's floral, flowery, and it's spring. And I feel like last year at this time I was drinking Moscow mules, or maybe that was in the summer more. Mm, May and June, I was drinking Moscow mules. It's like a, or some version of it. It's like ginger beer. Yeah, they drink, as in they will drink anything, so they're easy to please. They're not choosy or stuck up or picky. So it's just me adding a layer of, it's easy, but it's just me adding a layer of whatever to it. Excitement, something else to worry about and fret over until they come. Right? Do you guys ever do that? Just make things a little bit more difficult for yourself? It's a thing I do. Okay, guys. Right? And I've been saying, do you have social anxiety? I've been saying that I'm wanting to drink the coffee the Jaeger cold brew that I had before, that I was craving it, whatever, remembering it. But it has caffeine in it, and do I want them to come over in the evening? Is it an evening drink? Do I want to like rage all night? I don't know. I don't know. I don't think so. Anyway, if you have ideas, let me know. What should I make? What should I go get? I guess we'll start with this. Speaking of social anxiety. Oh yeah. Me and my exciting life and friends. It's just going to be good. It's going to be good to chill and look into a fire and talk, which I'm in the mood to do. Also, they haven't been here yet. I couldn't really dance before, so that hasn't changed. COVID hasn't changed that for me. I'm a typical white girl. I can't really. It's not in the cards for me. Priscilla, I'm so glad to see you. How are you? Dr. X. Deseo que tengas bonita viernes. Viernes? I don't know what that means, but I wish I did. Who else speaks Spanish and can translate for me? Do you guys want to chat or do you want to read? He said, have a good Friday. Oh, wonderful. You too, Dr. X. Haven't seen you in a minute. I hope you're doing well. We're going to read this book. And speaking of social anxiety, my dog's growling. Can you hear him? I don't know why. Anne is fixing to go to. Nice. So many Spanish speaking people. I'm so jealous. So jealous of you. Anyway, Anne is about to. Oh, Google Translate. Darn it. Anne is about to start school, you guys, and drama, as you can imagine, the shit is about to hit the fan. I hate to even say something like this. Our sweet, precious Anne of Green Gables book. No. You haven't been here, but Anne is 11 years old, and she has a March birthday, we learned. Maybe her birthday is the same day as mine. Same, Malik, same. I wish I spoke any Spanish. Although, whenever I watch, like, programming that has Spanish in it, I'm always so surprised with how much I do know, just picking up from culture here. Oh, no worries. No worries. You guys can always watch replay. And me being lonely and by myself is, I guess, and whiny about it, I guess it's my problem, not yours. I mean, if you don't show up, it's my problem, not yours, right? Okay, so obviously, up until this point, we know a few things about Anne. We know that she's very insecure about her hair color being orange. And her thinness. Would you? Oh, that's nice of you to say. And her looks. She's an orphan. She has things to be insecure about. Also, it's the age too. So this is not. I don't think it's unusual for her to feel this way, but then, like, she's had this big transition in her life. She's now living in at Green Gables from the orphanage, and now she's going to school. I can imagine things are really stirring up. So we have kind of a longish chapter, chapter 15. It's called A Tempest in the School Teapot. No, this was written in it was published in 1908. I think it was written a few years earlier than that. And just to keep you, it's Ellen Montgomery, and it was published. She's a Canadian author, but it was first published. Oh, well, you'll be proud of me. It was published. It was an American publisher. She sent all of her. She sent her manuscript to a bunch of Canadian publishers, but nobody wanted it. But an American publisher published it. So it's a Canadian book. It's a Canadian author. It's set in Canada, but we have this, like, American tie because it's well loved and consumed in America. You'll be proud of me, Dr. X. I'm running now 25 minutes at a time. It's like a warm up for 5 minutes and then run 25 minutes and then do my cool down. And not this last time, but the 2 times before, I had the most amazing runs. It's like I hit some kind of breakthrough. Like I'm still not on sugar. I'm still not eating sugar, guys. I haven't eaten sugar. Can you tell anything? I can't tell anything. It's still too soon to tell, I think. Notice anything. And I don't weigh myself. I haven't weighed myself in years. So I can't tell you like poundage or anything like that. I feel better internally. I feel better. But I had this wonderful like breakthrough last Saturday. Yeah, it was last Saturday. I had the most pleasant, easiest run of this entire journey, entire program. So that should give you hope. Like, it doesn't always suck. It can get more pleasant. But also I'm nervous. Like I feel like maybe I should push myself. Oh, 6 pounds is just water weight. You're not late, Tate, because I haven't started reading yet. We're talking about everything from masks to weight. Oh my goodness. Wow. It's not about the poundage, because I feel like no, Little House on the Prairie was written before this. No, it wasn't. When was Little House on the Prairie written? It was written after this, maybe. I can't remember. I watched a whole thing on Little House on the Prairie and a whole documentary on Ellen Montgomery. Both interesting. Laura Ingalls Wilder, they were, PBS had, Little House on the Prairie was, yeah, mid to late, I guess, yeah, late 1800s. And then this is set presumably at the turn of the 20th century. But I feel that way too. It's going to be a great day, guys. There's so many things to be happy about right now. We should just think about that right now instead of focusing on other things. Let's just give ourselves a break and think about happy stuff for a little bit. Just relax. It's going to be okay. What was I saying? We're talking about too many things. I have too many plates spinning. Are we talking about fitness? Are we talking about the books? Are we talking about Laura Ingalls Wilder? Oh, PBS had a documentary recently on Laura Ingalls Wilder, and they were saying that okay, so Laura Ingalls Wilder had a daughter who was a really popular author, and they think that maybe the daughter wrote a lot of the Little House books, and she just, because the genre is so different than what she was writing, which was like romance or mystery or some exciting adult themed books, that she didn't want anything to do with the Little House books. So, fun random fact for you that has nothing to do with the book that we're reading right now. Before we get going too, I want to let you know that because school is out, I'm going to be reading every day next week. But then my schedule is going to be every day. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Maybe it won't be as long of a time, but I'm going to show up every day at 9 during the week. except I'm going to be out of town for a minute. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there later in May. All right, are you ready? I'm ready. I think I'm sufficiently warmed up and ready to read. This is the turning point in the book. We're like getting to the halfway mark, guys. Almost. I'll try to do that, Adam. I think it'll be interesting. I really wish that Haps had a private broadcasts, because I don't know that I want to advertise to the entire world where I am going to be. But we'll see. We'll see how I feel when the time comes. Okay, chapter 15, A Tempest in the School Teapot. Oh no. Oh no. What a splendid day, said Anne, drawing a long breath. Isn't it good just to be alive on a day like this, isn't it? I pity the people who aren't born yet for missing it. They may have good days, of course, but they can never have this one. And it's splendider still to have such a lovely way to go to school by, isn't it? It's a lot nicer than going round by the road that is so dusty and hot, said Diana practically, peeping into her dinner basket and mentally calculating if 3 juicy, toothsome raspberry tarts reposing there were divided among 10 girls, how many bites each girl would have. Oh, that's cute. And also, she's calling her lunch dinner, and this is a very like Midwestern thing. People here anyway, in Southern Illinois, always say dinner, and they mean lunch. So, but you never you hardly ever hear people say the word lunch here. Is that like that where you guys are? People are like, oh, dinner. And then the evening meal is supper. Okay, the little girls of Avonlea School always pooled their lunches, and to eat 3 raspberry tarts all alone, or even to share them only with one's best chum, would have forever and ever branded as awful mean the girl who did it. And yet, when the tarts were divided among 10 girls, you got just enough to tantalize you. The way Anne and Diana went to school was a pretty one. Anne thought those walks to and from school Anne thought those walks to and from school with Diana couldn't be improved upon even by imagination. Going around by the main road would have been so unromantic, but to go by Lover's Lane and Willowmere and Violet Vale and the Birch Path was romantic, if ever anything was. I have a question for you guys before we continue, and maybe you can think about while we're reading this. Are you all familiar with the term introversion and extroversion? You guys know what I'm talking about when I say that? If somebody's introverted, somebody's extroverted. If you are, what would you guess Anne to be? An introvert or an extrovert? And yes, it's a spectrum. And I personally always test and fall somewhere in the middle. And so that's an option. You think she's an extrovert. I love that you think that. And I'll have more to say about this later if you guys remember, or if I remember. Lover's Lane opened out below the orchard at Green Gables and stretched far up into the woods to the end of the Cuthbert farm. It was the way by which the cows were taken back to pasture in the Woodhall home in winter. Anne had named it Lover's Lane before she had been a month at Green Gables. Not that lovers ever really walk there, she explained to Marilla, but Diana and I are reading a perfectly magnificent book, and there's a lover's lane in it, so we wanted to have one too. And it's a very pretty name, don't you think? So romantic. We can imagine the lovers in it, you know. I like that lane because you can think out loud there without people calling you crazy. Anne, starting out alone in the morning, went down Lover's Lane as far as the brook. Here Diana met her, and the 2 little girls went up the lane under the leafy arch of maples. Maples are such sociable trees, said Anne. They're always rustling and whispering to you. Until they came to a rustic bridge. Then they left the lane and walked through Mr. Barry's back field and past Willowmere. Beyond Willowmere came Violet Vale, a little green dimple in the shadow of Mr. Andrew Bell's big woods. Of course, there are no violets there now, Anne told Marilla, but Diana says there are millions of them in spring. Oh, Marilla, can you just imagine when you see them? It actually takes away my breath. I named it Violet Vale. Diana says she never saw the beat of me for hitting on fancy names for places. It's nice to be clever at something, isn't it? But Diana named the Birch Path. She wanted to, so I let her, but I'm sure I could have found something more poetical than plain Birch Path. Anybody can think of a name like that. But the Birch Path is one of the prettiest places in the world, Marilla. It was. Other people besides Anne thought so when they stumbled on it. It was a little narrow, twisting path winding down over a long hill straight through Mr. Bell's woods, where the light came down, sifted through so many emerald screens that it was as flawless as the heart of a diamond. It was fringed in all its length with slim young birches, white-stemmed and lissom-boughed ferns, star-flowers, and wild lilies of the valley, and scarlet tufts of pigeonberries grew thickly along it, and always there was a delightful spiciness in the air, and music of bird calls, and the murmur and laugh of woodwinds in the trees overhead. Now and then you might see a rabbit skipping across the road if you were quiet, which, with Anne and Diana, happened about once in a blue moon. Down in the valley, the path came out into the main road, and then it was just up the spruce hill to the school. Have you noticed a pattern I have that these beautiful, beautiful place descriptions and scenery that are so placid and serene tend to come right before some some like dramatic. It's a setup. It is a setup. We're being set up. The Avonlea School was a whitewashed building, low in the eaves and wide in the windows, furnished inside with comfortable, substantial, old-fashioned desks that opened and shut and were carved all over their lids with the initials and hieroglyphics of 3 generations of schoolchildren. The schoolhouse was set back from the road, and behind it was a dusky fir wood and a brook where all the children put their bottles of milk in the morning to keep cool and sweet until dinner hour. Marilla had seen Anne start off to school on the first day of September with many secret misgivings. Anne was such an odd girl. How would she get on with the other children? And how on earth would she ever manage to hold her tongue during school hours? Things went better than Marilla feared, however. Anne came home that evening in high spirits. I think I'm going to like going to school here, she announced. I don't think much of the master, though. He's all the time curling his mustache and making eyes at Prissy Andrews. Prissy's grown up, you know. She's 16 and she's studying for the entrance examination into Queen's Academy at Charlottetown next year. Tilly Bolter says the master is dead gone on her. She's got a beautiful complexion and curly brown hair, and she does it up so elegantly. She sits in the long seat at the back, and he sits there too most of the time to explain her lessons, he says. But Ruby Gillis says she saw him writing something on her slate, and when Prissy read it, she blushed as red as a beet and giggled, said Ruby Gillis. And Ruby Gillis says she doesn't believe it had anything to do with the lesson. I think Ruby Gillis is mentioned quite a bit later. Anne Shirley, don't let me hear you talking about your teacher in that way again, said Marilla sharply. You don't go to school to criticize the master. I guess he can teach you something, and it's your business to learn. And I want you to understand right off that you're not going to come home telling tales about him. That is something I won't encourage. I hope you were a good girl. Indeed I was, said Anne comfortably. It wasn't so hard as you might imagine, either. I sit with Diana. Our seat is right by the window, and we can look down to the Lake of Shining Waters. There are a lot of nice girls in school, and we had scrumptious fun playing at dinner time. It's so nice to have a lot of little girls to play with. But of course I like Diana best, and always will. I adore Diana. I'm dreadfully far behind the others. They're all in the 5th book and I'm only in the 4th. I feel that it's a kind of disgrace. But there's not one of them has such an imagination as I have, and soon I found that out. We had reading and geography and Canadian history and dictation today. Mr. Phillips said that my spelling was disgraceful, and he held up my slate so that everybody could see it, all marked over. I felt so mortified, Marilla. He might have been politer to a stranger, I think. Ruby Gillis gave me an apple, and Sophia Sloane lent me a lovely pink card with "May I see you home" on it. Excuse me. I am to give it back to her tomorrow. So she just had, it's so cute. It's so cute, the cards that they exchange. And paper used to be expensive, guys. It used to be not something like books were, like, compared to other objects, books were expensive. Paper, stationery, cards was an expensive thing. And Tilly Bolter let me wear her bead ring all afternoon. Can I have some of those pearl beads off the old pincushion in the garret to make myself a ring? And oh, Marilla, Jane Andrews told me that Minnie McPherson told her that she heard Prissy Andrews tell Sarah Gillis that I had a very pretty nose. Marilla, that is the first compliment I have ever had in my life, and you can't imagine what a strange feeling it gave me. Marilla, have I a pretty nose? I know you'll tell me the truth. Your nose is well enough, said Marilla shortly. Secretly, she thought Anne's nose was remarkably pretty one, but she had no intention of telling her so. That was 3 weeks ago, and all had gone smoothly so far. And now, this crisp September morning, Anne and Diana were tripping blithely down the birch path, 2 of the happiest little girls in Avonlea. I guess Gilbert Blythe will be in school today, said Diana. He's been visiting his cousins over in New Brunswick all summer, and he only came home Saturday. He's awfully handsome, Anne, and he teases the girls something terrible. He just torments our lives out. Diana's voice indicated that she rather liked having her life tormented out than not. Gilbert Blythe, said Anne. Isn't it his name that's written up on the porch wall with Julia bells and a big "take notice" over them? So maybe I should explain. I don't remember if they go into detail about this, but they have like a bulletin board, so to speak, in their school. And instead of passing notes in class, as you and I may have done back in the day, things were posted on this bulletin board for everyone to see and to take notice. So, like, if a boy liked a girl, he could like pin a note to the bulletin board saying so for everyone to see. Yes, said Diana, tossing her head, but I'm sure he doesn't like Julia Bell so very much. Or I think it's or vice versa, like, or like a girl could write some boy's name on the bulletin board. I'll have to do some research on this. I think it's fascinating and interesting to think about, like, the variations that we have on this in these modern times, 21st century. Oh, I'm sorry. I've heard him say he studied the multiplication table by her freckles. Oh, don't speak about freckles to me, implored Anne. It isn't delicate when I've got so many, but I do think that writing take notices up on the wall about the boys and girls is the silliest ever. I should just like to see anybody dare write my name up with the boys. Not, of course, she hastened to add, that anybody would. Anne sighed. She didn't want her name written up, but it was a little humiliating to know that there was no danger of it. Nonsense, said Diana, whose black eyes and glossy tresses had played such havoc with the hearts of Avonlea schoolboys that her name figured on the porch walls in a half a dozen take notices. It's only meant as a joke, and don't be too sure that your name won't ever be written up. Charlie Sloane is dead gone on you. He told his mother, mind you, that you were the smartest girl in school. That's better than being good looking. No, it isn't, said Anne, feminine to the core. I'd rather be pretty than clever, and I hate Charlie Sloane. I can't bear a boy with Google eyes. If anyone wrote my name up with his, I'd never get over it, Diana Barry. But it is nice to keep head of your class. You'll have Gilbert in your class after this, said Diana, and he's used to being head of his class, I can tell you. He's only in the 4th book, although he's nearly 14. 4 years ago, his father was sick and had to go out to Alberta for his health, and Gilbert went with him. They were there 3 years, and Gil didn't go to school hardly any until they came back. You won't find it so easy to keep head after this, Anne. Uh-oh, so Gilbert's handsome and smart. And he teases them. I'm glad, said Anne quickly. I couldn't really feel proud of keeping head of little boys and girls of just 9 or 10. I got up yesterday spelling ebullition. I can't even pronounce it. Josie Pye was head, and mind you, she peeped in her book. Mr. Phillips didn't see her, and he was looking at Prissy Andrews, but I did. I just swept her a look of freezing scorn, and she got as red as a beet and spelled it wrong after all. Those Pye girls are cheats all around, said Diana indignantly as they climbed the fence of the main road. Gertie Pye actually went and put her milk bottle in my place in the brook yesterday. Did you ever? I don't speak to her now. When Mr. Phillips was in the... she doesn't speak to her now. And this just happened yesterday. Oh my gosh. When Mr. Phillips was in the back of the room hearing Prissy Andrews' Latin, Diana whispered to Anne, That's Gilbert Blythe sitting across the aisle from you, Anne. Just look at him and see if you don't think he's handsome. Anne looked accordingly. She had a good chance to do so, for the said Gilbert Blythe was absorbed in stealthily pinning the long yellow braid of Ruby Gillis, who sat in front of him, to the back of her seat. He was a tall boy with curly brown hair, roguish hazel eyes, and a mouth twisted into a teasing smile. Presently, Ruby Gillis started up to take a sum to the master. She fell back into her seat with a little shriek, believing that her hair was pulled out by the roots. Everybody looked at her, and Mr. Phillips glared so sternly that Ruby began to cry. Gilbert had whisked the pin out of sight and was studying his history with the soberest face in the world. But when the commotion subsided, he looked at Anne and winked with inexpressible drollery. I think your Gilbert Blythe is handsome, confided Anne to Diana, but I think he's very bold. It isn't good manners to wink at a strange girl. But it was not until the afternoon that things really began to happen. Mr. Phillips was back in the corner explaining a problem in algebra to Prissy Andrews, and the rest of the scholars were doing pretty much as they pleased, eating green apples, whispering, drawing pictures on their slates, and driving crickets, harnessed to strings, up and down the aisle. Oh my gosh. Gilbert Blythe was trying to make Anne Shirley look at him and failing utterly because Anne was at the moment totally oblivious, not only of the very existence of Gilbert Blythe, but of every other scholar in Avonlea School and of Avonlea School itself. With her chin propped on her hands and her eyes fixed on the blue glimpse of the lake of shining waters that the west window afforded, she was far away in a gorgeous dreamland, hearing and seeing nothing save her own wonderful visions. And here maybe I'll pause and say that I believe Anne is, of course we'll never know because Anne is a fictional character, so there's no right or wrong answer, but I believe that Anne is an introvert simply because she lives so much in her mind. Right? Gilbert Blythe wasn't used to putting himself out to make a girl look at him and meeting with failure. She should look at him, that red-haired Shirley girl with the little pointed chin and big eyes that weren't like the eyes of any other girl in Avonlea School. Gilbert reached across the aisle, picked up the end of Anne's long red braid, held it out at arm's length, and said in a piercing whisper, "Carrots! Carrots!" Uh-oh. Then Anne looked at him with a vengeance. She did more than look. She sprang to her feet, her bright fancies fallen into cureless ruin. She flashed one indignant glance at Gilbert from eyes whose angry sparkle was swiftly quenched in equally angry tears. "You mean, hateful boy," she exclaimed passionately. "How dare you?" And then, thwack! Anne had brought her slate down on Gilbert's head and cracked it. Slate, not head, clear across. Avonlea School always enjoyed a scene. This was an especially enjoyable one. Everybody said, "Oh," in horrified delight. Diana gasped. Ruby Gillis, who was inclined to be hysterical, began to cry. Tommy Sloane let his team of crickets escape him altogether while he stared open-mouthed at the tableau. Mr. Phillips stalked down the aisle and laid his hand heavily on Anne's shoulder. "Anne Shirley, what does this mean?" he said angrily. Anne returned no answer. It was asking too much of flesh and blood to expect her to tell before the whole school that she had been called carrots. Gilbert, it was who spoke up stoutly. "It was my fault, Mr. Phillips. I teased her." Mr. Phillips paid no heed to Gilbert. "I am sorry to see a pupil of mine displaying such a temper and such a vindictive spirit," he said in a solemn tone, as if the mere fact of being a pupil of his ought to root out all evil passions from the heart of small, imperfect mortals. "And go and stand on the platform in front of the blackboard for the rest of the afternoon." Oh my goodness. Anne would have infinitely preferred a whipping to this punishment, under which her sensitive spirit quivered as from a whiplash. With a white, set face, she obeyed. Mr. Phillips took a chalk crayon and wrote on the blackboard above her head, "Anne Shirley has a very bad temper. Anne Shirley must learn to control her temper," and then read it out loud so that even the primer class, who couldn't read writing, should understand it. Anne stood there the rest of the afternoon with that legend above her. She did not cry or hang her head. Anger was still too hot in her heart for that, and it sustained her amid all her agony of humiliation. With resentful eyes and passion-red cheeks, she confronted alike Diana's sympathetic gaze and Charlie Sloane's indignant nods and Josie Pye's malicious smiles. It's still happening today, obviously. I feel like shame is like the fuel for the engine of the patriarchy, or any kind of like top-down authoritarian rule system. But we have a local town that's making the news because a teacher actually used the N-word, calling to a student, a PE teacher, a track coach even, and thankfully a bunch of other people heard it, so it wasn't like the student against the teacher situation. But just last night, the school board and whatever governing body that decides these things voted her dismissed from her job, which, this happened months ago. I feel like they didn't have to wait until the end of the school year. She should have been fired or done something immediately. So anyway, this is something to unpack in a different broadcast. But terrible. Okay, Diana's sympathetic gaze and Charlie Sloane's indignant nods and Josie Pye's malicious smiles. As for Gilbert Blythe, she would not even look at him. She would never look at him again. She would never speak to him. When school was dismissed, Anne marched out with her red head held high. Gilbert Blythe tried to intercept her at the porch door. "I'm awfully sorry I made fun of your hair, Anne," he whispered contritely. "Honest, I am. Don't be mad for keeps now." Anne swept by disdainfully, without look or sign of hearing. "Oh, how could you, Anne?" breathed Diana as they went down the road, half reproachfully, half admiringly. Diana felt she could never have resisted Gilbert's plea. "I shall never forgive Gilbert Blythe," said Anne firmly. "And Mr. Phillips spelled my name without an E, too. The iron has entered into my soul, Diana." "You mustn't mind Gilbert making fun of your hair," she said soothingly. "Why, he makes fun of all girls. He laughs at mine because it's so black. He calls me a crow a dozen times, and I never heard him apologize for anything before, either." "There's a great deal of difference between being called a crow and being called carrots," said Anne with dignity. "Gilbert Blythe has hurt my feelings excruciatingly, Diana. It's possible The matter might have been blown over without more excruciation if nothing else had happened. But when things began to happen, they are able to keep on. They are apt to keep on. Avonlea scholars often spent noon hour picking gum in Mr. Bell's spruce grove, over the hill and across his big pasture field. From there, they could keep an eye on Eben Wright's house, where the master boarded. When they saw Mr. Phillips emerging therefrom, they ran for the schoolhouse, but the distance being about 3 times longer than Mr. Wright's lane, they were very apt to arrive there, breathless and gasping, some 3 minutes too late. On the following day, Mr. Phillips was seized with one of his spasmodic fits of reform and announced, before going to dinner, that he should expect to find all the scholars in their seats when he returned. Anyone who came in late would be punished. All the boys and some of the girls went to Mr. Bell's spruce grove as usual, fully intending to stay only long enough to pick a chew. But spruce groves are seductive, and yellow nuts of gum beguiling. They picked and loitered and strayed, and as usual, the first thing that recalled them to a sense of the flight of time was Jimmy Glover's shouting from the top of a patriarchal old spruce, "Master's coming!" The girls, who were on the ground, started first and managed to reach the schoolhouse in time, but without a second to spare. The boys, who had to wriggle hastily down from the trees, were later, and Anne, who had not been picking gum at all, but was wandering happily in the far end of the grove, waist deep among the bracken, singing softly to herself with a wreath of rice lilies on her hair, as if she were some wild divinity of the shadowy places, was latest of all. Anne could run like a deer, however. She did, with the impish result that she overtook the boys at the door and was swept into the schoolhouse among them, just as Mr. Phillips was in the act of hanging up his hat. Mr. Phillips' brief reforming energy was over. He didn't want the bother of punishing a dozen pupils, but it was necessary to do something to save his word, so he looked for a scapegoat and found it in Anne, who had dropped into her seat, gasping for breath, with her forgotten lily wreath hanging askew over one ear and giving her a particularly rakish and disheveled appearance. Excuse me. Scapegoat Anne! Anne Shirley, since you seem to be so fond of the boys' company, we shall indulge your taste for it this afternoon, he said sarcastically. Take those flowers out of your hair and sit with Gilbert Blythe. What? No! The other boys snickered. Diana, turning pale with pity, plucked the wreath from Anne's hair and squeezed her hand. Anne stared at the master as if turned to stone. Did you hear what I said, Anne? Queried Mr. Phillips sternly. Yes, sir, said Anne slowly, but I didn't suppose you really meant it. I assure you I did, still with the sarcastic inflection which all the children, and Anne especially, hated. It flickered on the raw. Obey me at once. For a moment, Anne looked as if she meant to disobey. Then, realizing there was no help for it, she rose haughtily, stepped across the aisle, sat down beside Gilbert Blythe, and buried her face in her arms on the desk. Ruby Gillis, who caught a glimpse of it as it went down, told the others going home from school that she'd actually never seen anything like it. It was so white with awful little red spots on it. What? To Anne, this was the end of all things. That Ruby Gillis needs to be taught a lesson, don't you think? Ruby Gillis is a gossip. It was bad enough to be singled out for punishment from among a dozen equally guilty ones. It was worse still to be sent to sit with a boy, but that the boy should be Gilbert Blythe was heaping insult on injury to a degree utterly unbearable. Anne felt she could not bear it, and it would be of no use to try. Her whole being seethed with shame and anger and humiliation. At first the other scholars looked and whispered and giggled and nudged. But as Anne never lifted her head, and as Gilbert worked fractions as if his whole soul was absorbed in them, and them only, they soon returned to their own tasks, and Anne was forgotten. When Mr. Phillips called the history class out, Anne should have gone, but Anne did not move, and Mr. Phillips, who had been writing some verses to Priscilla before he called the class, was thinking about an obstinate rhyme still and never missed her. Prissy, his crush. Once, when nobody was looking, Gilbert took from his desk a little pink candy heart with a gold motto on it, "You are sweet," and slipped it under the curve of Anne's arm. Whereupon Anne arose, took the pink heart gingerly between the tips of her fingers, dropped it on the floor, ground it to a powder beneath her heel, and resumed her position without deigning to bestow a glance on Gilbert. Oh, my goodness. When school went out, Anne marched to her desk ostentatiously, took out everything therein, books and writing tablet, pen and ink, testament and arithmetic, and piled them neatly on her cracked slate. "What are you taking all those things home for, Anne?" Diana wanted to know as soon as they were out on the road. She had not dared to ask the question before. "I'm not coming back to school any more," said Anne. Diana gasped and stared at Anne to see if she meant it. "Will Marilla let you stay home?" she asked. "She'll have to," said Anne. "I'll never go to school to that man again." "Oh, Anne!" Diana looked as if she were ready to cry. "I do think you're mean. What shall I do? Mr. Phillips will make me sit with that horrid Gertie Pye. I know he will, because she's sitting alone. Do come back, Anne." "I'd do almost anything in the world for you, Diana," said Anne sadly. "I'd let myself be torn limb from limb if it would do you any good. But I can't do this, so please don't ask it. You harrow up my very soul." "Just think of all the fun you'll miss," mourned Diana. "We're going to build the loveliest new house down by the brook, and we'll be playing ball next week. And you've never played ball, Anne. It's tremendously exciting. And we're going to learn a new song. Jane Andrews is practicing it up now. Alice Andrews is going to bring a new pansy book next week, and we're all going to read it out loud, chapter about, down by the brook. And you know you're so fond of reading out loud, Anne." Nothing moved Anne in the least. Her mind was made up. She would not go to school to Mr. Phillips again. She told Marilla so when she got home. "Nonsense," said Marilla. "It isn't nonsense at all," said Anne, gazing at Marilla with solemn, reproachful eyes. "Don't you understand, Marilla? I've been insulted." "Insulted fiddlesticks. You'll go to school tomorrow as usual." "Oh, no." Anne shook her head gently. "I'm not going back, Marilla. I'll learn my lessons at home. I'll be as good as I can be, and hold my tongue all the time, if it's possible at all. But I will not go back to school, I assure you." Marilla saw something remarkably like unyielding stubbornness looking out of Anne's small face. She understood that she would have trouble in overcoming it, but she resolved wisely to say nothing just then. "I'll run down and see Rachel about it this evening," she thought. "There's no use reasoning with Anne now. She's too worked up, and I've an idea she can be awful stubborn if she takes the notion. Far as I can make out from her story, Mr. Phillips has been carrying matters with a rather high hand, but it would never do to say so to her. I'll just talk it over with Rachel. She's sent 10 children to school, and she ought to know something about it. She'll have heard the whole story, too, by this time." Marilla found Mrs. Lynde knitting quilts as industriously and cheerfully as usual. "I suppose you know what I've come about," she said, a little shamefacedly. Mrs. Rachel nodded. "About Anne's fuss in school, I reckon," she said. "Tilly Boulter was in on her way home from school and told me about it." "I don't know what to do with her," said Marilla. "She declares she won't go back to school. I never saw a child so worked up. I've been expecting trouble ever since she started to school. I knew things were going too smooth to last. She's so high strung. What would you advise, Rachel?" "Well, since you've asked my advice, Marilla," said Mrs. Lynde amiably. Mrs. Lynde dearly loved to be asked for advice. "I'd just humor her for a little at first. That's what I'd do. It's my belief that Mr. Phillips was in the wrong. Of course, it doesn't do to say so to the children, you know. And of course, he did right to punish her yesterday for giving way to temper. But today was different. The others who were late should have been punished as well as Anne, that's what. And I don't believe in making the girls sit with the boys for punishment. It isn't modest. Tilly Boulter was real indignant. She took Anne's part right through and said all the scholars did too. Anne seems real popular among them somehow. I never thought she'd take with them so well." "Then you really think I'd let her stay home?" said Marilla in amazement. Yes, that is. I wouldn't say school to her again until she said it herself. Depend upon it, Marilla. She'll cool off in a week or so and be ready enough to go back of her own accord. That's what. While if you were to make her go back right off, dear knows what freak or tantrum she'd take next and make more trouble than ever. The less fuss made, the better, in my opinion. She won't miss much by not going to school, as far as that goes. Mr. Phillips isn't any good at all as a teacher. The order he keeps is scandalous, that's what, and he neglects the young fry and puts all his time in those big scholars he's getting ready for Queen's. He'd never have got the school for another year if his uncle hadn't been a trustee, the trustee, for he just leads the other two around by the nose, that's what. I declare, I don't know what education in this island is coming to. Mrs. Rachel shook her head, and as much as to say, if she were only at the head of the educational system of the province, things would go much better managed. Sorry. We're almost done. Marilla took Mrs. Rachel's advice, and not another word was said to Anne about going back to school. She learned her lessons at home, did her chores, and played with Diana in the chilly purple autumn twilights. But when she met Gilbert Blythe on the road or encountered him in Sunday school, she passed him by with an icy contempt that was no whit thawed by his evident desire to appease her. Even Diana's efforts as a peacemaker were of no avail. Anne had evidently made up her mind to hate Gilbert Blythe to the end of her life. As much as she hated Gilbert, however, she did love Diana with all the love of her passionate little heart, equally intense in its likes and dislikes. One evening, Marilla, coming in from the orchard with a basket of apples, found Anne sitting alone by the east window in the twilight, crying bitterly. "What's ever the matter now, Anne?" she asked. "It's about Diana," sobbed Anne luxuriously. "I love Diana so, Marilla. I cannot ever live without her. But I know very well when we grow up that Diana will get married and go away and leave me. And oh, what shall I do? I hate her husband. I just hate him furiously. I've been imagining it all out, the wedding and everything. Diana's dressed in snowy garments with a veil and looking as beautiful and regal as a queen. And me, the bridesmaid, with a lovely dress too, and puffed sleeves, but with a breaking heart hid beneath my smiling face. And then bidding Diana goodbye." Here Anne broke down entirely and wept with increasing bitterness. Marilla turned quickly away to hide her twitching face, but it was of no use. She collapsed on the nearest chair and burst into such hearty and unusual peal of laughter that Matthew, crossing the yard outside, halted in amazement. When had he heard Marilla laugh like that before? "Well, Anne Shirley," said Marilla as soon as she could speak, "if you must borrow trouble, for pity's sake, borrow it handier home. I should think you had an imagination, sure enough." So back to I've been on here a minute. That's the end of chapter 15. Back to her being an introvert. I think that introversion isn't so much that you don't like being with people. It's more that you have your relationship with people is perhaps a little bit more based on she just loves people. She just loves people so much. A little more based on like your own internal thoughts about people, or you imagining how people are, than based in like your actual interactions with them. She's not shy either. She's not. She's probably somewhere in the middle. Anyway, she's I don't know. She's a trip, isn't she? What do you think? Do you know anybody like this? Do you maybe yourself imagine how people are, and that I love her too. I love her so much, and that informs your relationship about people. And maybe it's not because the reason I'm saying this is because she loves Diana so much, right? But Diana is not not necessarily an intellectual match for Anne. Diana likes to read books, sure, but I think Anne is in a completely different league with her. Oh, my stomach's growling. Excuse me. Her imagination. Anyway, oh my goodness, drama with Gilbert Blythe. So much drama, and what do you think? Is Anne making too much of a big deal out of this? Oh, you're welcome. Has she punished Gilbert enough? Is it a punishment to ignore Gilbert? I think she's trying to exact some kind of punishment. Maybe not. Maybe it's self-preservation. Maybe she's decided that if you're just going to call me carrots or really hurt my feelings, then why should I waste any energy on you whatsoever? Oh, totally. I think so too. Yeah, but would he ever admit that? Anyway, I'll see you Monday and then Tuesday and then Wednesday and then Thursday and then Friday of next week. Okay. Have a wonderful weekend. Yes. Good for her. Good for her. For all of her insecurity, she's awfully secure enough to, not have to necessarily orient her life around Gilbert Blythe's gaze as the other girls do in class, right? Bye, Kelly. Bye, Tate. Bye, everybody.